Welcome to the Lead Every Day show. Our mission is to see a world well led. And our strategy to get there? To empower leaders like you to lead every day. So let's get to work.
Who cares? What a question. The reality is there are some things I don't really care about, and there are some things that I care about a lot. And as I think about you who are listening this week, I know you've got one of the things on your mind is do the people around me care about what I care about? It's an important question we're going to dive into today on the Lead Everyday Show. Welcome to our content. I'm Randy Gravitt.
And I'm Mark Miller.
And Mark, we're going to dive into this question that was sent to us by a young leader asking what can you say to us about declining motivation and employee engagement? And we're gonna kind of try to unpack this and be helpful to the people out there who are asking questions today. So I'm glad you're with me, Mark. I think I'm gonna need a wingman today.
Well, let's unpack it.
That's gonna be great. Okay, so it's interesting that he combined declining motivation and employee engagement, because I'm not sure they're the same, Mark. I'm pretty sure you would agree with my side of this. But I want to make sure, are we on the same page that these might not be the same thing?
Yeah, they're not the same thing. I mean, they might be first cousins, and somebody's level of motivation may cast a halo that would impact their engagement, but they're two different things.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so let's dive into this conversation a little bit today. I know when we talk about motivation, you and I have talked about there are a couple of kinds of motivation, and I would love let's just start there, because I think there are people who their motivation is maybe it's non-existent or maybe it's waning, and we kind of see employee engagement that's struggling, and there are cousins. That might be a good way to say it. But let's start with the motivation piece and talk about that for a second, and just make sure that people have a way to think about that.
Yeah, motivation, I think in its simplest terms, is why someone does something. What motivates them? What moves them to action? And basically, there are two forms at the highest level. It's intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsic are those motivations that come from within, because there's personal belief or identity or passion. Extrinsic can be fear of failure or the promise of rewards or vision. In fact, we have said for years that people are really only going to initiate change for one of three reasons: vision, pain, or fear of future consequences. So those are some of your primary levers if you're trying to motivate an individual or a group of people. But that's different from engagement. Engagement is the way people approach their work. It's how they do their work. It's how much energy and passion and focus and diligence they bring to the task at hand. And they're both essential. They're both critical. I would often think of motivation as a doorway or a gateway, because if somebody doesn't engage, if they don't begin, if they're not motivated to start, then their level of engagement is irrelevant because they're not in the game. So you got to get folks in the game, and then you want to do everything possible to steward their level of engagement, because you want it to be really, really high.
That's great. Okay, so the last numbers I've seen through the last 3 or 4 years they've been all over the place, but typically somewhere between 25 and 30%, according to Gallup, about 30% of the American workforce is engaged at work, which, let's think about that. If you're the leader, that means 7 out of every 10 people that are on your team, in your organization, really don't care about what you care about. That's pretty depressing if I'm the leader. And so that is go ahead.
Well, that's our reality, but I want to share the global numbers, because as you and I have discussed just recently, we've got listeners in over 150 countries.
Yeah.
And the global engagement numbers tend to be half of what they are in the U.S.
15%. I was
hovering around 15%. And so it's a big deal.
It's a huge deal. And I think it's really, again, I use the word depressing. If I'm the leader and nobody cares about what I care about, it just feels impossible to do what we're trying to do. And yet what we've seen through some of the work we've done and some of the content that you've actually written a book on engagement, Win the Heart. I love that book. It's so powerful. We've done workshops on that. We see that organizations, when they start to take these steps that we're going to lay out today, they can actually ramp up their engagement pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I love one of the things you said several months ago. It was on a show, I think, where we're talking, and I made some statement about, that is if you say that 30% of the workforce in the U.S. is engaged, that's a pitiful picture of the American workforce. And you said something that day I thought was really powerful. You said, I think it's a reflection on the sorry state of American leadership, because this really is a leadership issue as much as anything else. And so if anybody's listening and if you got an engagement problem, I want to look myself in the mirror first. Am I doing everything I can to create that right environment? So Mark, you've written about this, that you wrote the book. I'd love a little bit of the backstory of that. And then can we unpack some of the ideas? I think we can help some people today who may be struggling with employee engagement. And actually, we might see some motivation return too if engagement goes up.
Well, yeah, and let me just challenge one thing you said, and I understand completely. A lot of leaders are discouraged because of the low levels of engagement. And you may have, I think, used the term, it can be depressing. Okay, but think of the opportunity. What happens if you take 30% engagement and you took it to 50 or 60 or 80 or 90? And I've worked on teams and in organizations with engagement in the mid 90s. I know what that looks like. I know what that feels like. So if I go into a team with low engagement, I'm like a kid in a candy store. You talking about getting performance to improve really, really quickly is you get people to care. And so I want to connect one more dot. We started with who cares, then we started talking about engagement. Well, when we did this work, we said one of the challenges is that engagement is a concept and a construct from the world of psychology. And we said we want to make it more approachable. And we don't want just to improve on an academic definition. We said we're going to make it simple. Engagement is how much someone cares, how much they care about their work, how much they care about their coworkers, how much they care about their customer, and how much they care about the organization. And so our role as leaders is to create the right context so that people will care more. And you'll see all sorts of benefits. That you mentioned Gallup earlier. They've been researching this topic for decades, and they would tell you that there is a direct correlation between sales, profits, and customer satisfaction and engagement. You want more sales, profits, and customer satisfaction, you take engagement up and you're going to get it. So our backstory began when we were trying to figure out what do the greatest organizations on the planet do consistently well. We call these high-performance organizations, those capable of achieving and sustaining elite levels of performance over time. And so that's another topic for another day. But as it relates to today's content, we discovered that one of the things all high-performance organizations do is they win the heart. They focus on and steward and lift the engagement level of their people. Now, based on what we've already said today, that may be a blinding flash of the obvious, because I'll go ahead and give you a spoiler alert. The ultimate goal of a high-performance organization is to excel at execution, to do the right thing the right way every time. That's their aspiration. Well, just connect the dots logically, intellectually. People who don't care, they don't care about elite levels of execution. They don't care consistently about doing the right thing the right way every time. And so when we discovered that this was one of those critical elements in all high performance organizations, we said, we've got to go to work and figure out what are the strategies and tactics that leaders can use to help people care more. So that's the backstory.
That's great. And so again, let's just make sure we've defined engagement as the amount that someone cares, right? That's what we would say. I mean, in its simplest form, does somebody come into the workforce? And we might even use the word, are they wholehearted or are they half-hearted? I mean, it really is a great way to think about engagement. If you've got people that are just going through the motions, maybe they do lack motivation or whatever, but they're really not locked in and caring about what the organization cares about, the supervisor cares about, the owner cares about, the vision cares about. I mean, all that stuff. If we've got people that are just half-hearted going through the motion, so much is being wasted, really, when we think about it that way. So, yeah, I love that.
Let me say this. You referenced when they come into the organization. Here's the deal. Everybody's fully engaged on day one.
Yeah, that's true.
The leadership challenge is 6 weeks, 6 months, and 6 years later.
Yeah, to keep
how
them engaged.
How engaged are they? Because you said it before. I'm gonna say it again. Engagement is the responsibility of leaders.
Yeah,
and I know for some of you that may set a little bit like, yeah, but I got all these people who aren't engaged. It's your responsibility to help them care more. And I'll just go ahead and kind of another spoiler alert. If you cannot create an environment where someone can care, they don't need to be on your team, because you need people on your team who care, because ultimately you want to execute.
Well, and I love that, what you said there. I mean, because we won't get into the whole high performance organization model here, but we would say that really is, that model is the job description of the leader. And so for me, when I think about it, if I'm the leader, it is my responsibility to create an environment where people want to be leaned in, want to be wholehearted. If I don't do that, what am I doing as a leader? I mean, I'm probably busy, but I'm not busy about the right things if I'm not locked in on creating this environment where people can care. Okay. So you mentioned the word care. You've got a way for us to think about that. You wrote about in Win the Heart. We teach it in our workshops. I think it could be really helpful here to anybody who's listening who says, well, where would I start? What would I do if I really wanted to increase? You talked about doubling the amount of engagement or getting it up, oh my goodness, to 90+%. That would be incredible. What's my first step?
All right. Well, let's unpack this together, because you're right. I wrote the book, but you've taught this to thousands of people. You've probably taught this to more people than I have, and you've worked in a lot of organizations. And so let's kind of unpack this together. But the first is connection. Connection is one of those essential elements, because you're not going to care if you don't feel connected. And there are any number of strategies and tactics. I would argue that it actually begins with recruiting and selection. You need to have some confidence that people are going to connect with your vision, with your values, with your ethos, that they're going to be a contributing member of your team. You need to try and discern as much of that as possible beforehand. So that's where I think it begins. It doesn't start after they're on board. But once they're on board, another strategy that you need to seriously consider is how robust is your onboarding process? Are you using this as an opportunity to inculcate the vision, the values, to help people care? Give them a reason to care. What is the organization about? What are you trying to accomplish? How are you trying to impact the world beyond sales and profits, beyond a healthy balance sheet and the stock price? What kind of difference are you trying to make in the world? As you share these things in those early days, those formative days, you'll have an impact on somebody's entire career. So those were a couple thoughts. What have you got?
Well, yeah, that's good. You triggered in me when you said that. I remember years ago when you remember Horst Schulze from the Ritz-Carlton organization, founder, I guess. And he said, though, one time that a person's first 40 hours of their career are the most important 40 hours of their career. And I think that's one of the things he was alluding to there is you have no better chance to connect people to who you are, what you believe, what you value, that vision part than that first week. It is like out of the gate. That ought to be where we're really trying to create the foundation of engagement, honestly, to start with. But I would also say, I want to add to that, it's not just connecting them to the vision and the values and all that. We saw in the research, one of the things that was so powerful is you connect them to their teammates. When people feel connected to their coworkers, actually their engagement goes up. If they just work together, that's one thing. But we are champions of, let's make sure that we create community. We get to know each other. We serve each other. We celebrate each other. We grieve when people are hurting. I mean, all that kind of stuff. We have empathy for each other, and we're really shoulder to shoulder in it. I think there's so much power in that connection there also leads to engagement going up as well. We see it time and time again. And the best organizations, really, there is something about that togetherness. You know, I always say when a team comes together, that's when they set themselves apart. It's amazing what happens when there's a connection there, not just to the vision, but really to each other that we work with.
Yeah, and that's one of those critical elements to build a high-performance team is that sense of community, that caring for each other as much as you actually care about the work. And so very, very, very powerful.
One other little piece of connection I will mention, maybe two, but one of them in particular is we see this and we talk about this all the time, is having a connection to the customer. When you start connecting to the customer and understand that what we're making is actually not about what we're making, it's actually for someone, and we understand that you start connecting with people and you're building a product. Maybe you're connected to, you believe in the product. That was the other little piece I was going to say there. If we believe in our product, but we really understand that this product is not about the product, it's about the end user. We see this happen all the time. There's so much more engagement in organizations where they care about their customers, and it actually sets the customer. I mean, the customer is set up for success, yes, but the organization, the brand gets better because the customers become raving fans of what's going on because they're being treated the way they should be treated. So there's good stuff going all around this thing. It's a virtuous cycle.
Yeah. And be creative on the way that you create these connections. There's a story widely circulated about the fact that for years, Amazon had an extra chair in the meetings. And they said, we want everybody to imagine that that's a customer. Well, let's take it a step further. There are a lot of organizations that actually bring customers into meetings to help maintain that focus and the priority and the preeminence of the customer. We did something years ago at Chick-fil-A. We did this for several years where the officers of the company were given the opportunity to take customer calls, real live customer calls. And I've taken a lot of those calls, and you get to hear what they're feeling and thinking and their emotions. And you get to actually not only dialogue with them, but you get to then write them a note when it's all over. And hopefully you've been able to help resolve their issue if they had an issue. So be creative, but connection matters. Let me say one more thing about connection. We'll move on. And that's the connection between you as the leader with employees. And one way to facilitate that is real conversations. You and I had the opportunity to hang out with the former president of Starbucks. Tell them about that story.
Yeah, we were doing an event together actually, and we did a little conversation with him, and one of the things he said I thought was so great. He said, you can have all this vision value stuff that we're talking about here. You can have all that stuff hanging in every break room and every whiteboard in the building, but you really build a company by having real conversations with real people. You've got to sit down and talk to people and know, who are we creating this for? And what is, what, not just what are we doing, but who is it for? And I think there's so much power in that. I'm actually, I don't know that I've told you, I'm reading Doris Kearns Goodwin's book on leadership. You probably read it, but she outlines 4 of the presidents and kind of tells a little bit of their backstory, their leadership kind of thing. And one of them is FDR. And she talks in there about how FDR was so energized by his conversations with voters. Basically, he loved getting out and talking to people. And he was a big talker to start with, but he just learned to listen. He started listening to people, and it formed his politics, obviously. But he was elected basically because he was able to connect with people so well and listen to what they had to say. And I think there's just something, to your point, so powerful when we start having conversations with people like FDR. It might energize us as well. If your motivation is waning at work, go talk to somebody who you're helping, and I think it might reframe your perspective. That's been my case.
Yeah. And so let me add this. Some of you listening are going, I just don't have time to do that. Well, okay, you're busy. I'm busy. We're all busy. Start with your direct reports. You may have 100 employees, 500 employees, 5,000 employees, but how many men and women report directly to you? Have some conversations with them, and then encourage them to have conversations with their direct reports. And you can cascade this and create this connection throughout the organization, which, by the way, you need it top to bottom, because it's one thing for senior leaders to be engaged. You want every level to be engaged. And ultimately, I would argue, most importantly, you want the frontline people engaged. So you may not talk to everyone, but be sure those conversations are taking place.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't want to hijack the process. I think what you're saying there is right on, but I do think there's something powerful about taking 15 minutes once a week and going to the front line and having a conversation and just inspecting, are the messages traveling from the top seat all the way down? Are we cascading communication? You've talked to me about that through the years, the power of that. And so
Sure.
I think there's having our ear to the ground is the point here. It just becomes so powerful when we're connected to the vision, to our coworkers, and to our customers. I think that's good. Okay, so let's continue down the road here. What we also found, Mark, was not just connection, but affirmation played a significant role in the power of engagement. When people feel affirmed, actually their engagement goes up. When they're connected, their engagement goes up. When they're affirmed, their engagement goes up. And so I think as leaders, we need to be looking for opportunities to catch people, as Ken Blanchard always said, doing what's right. Not, it's easy to catch people doing what's wrong. And, there's going to be feedback for that. But I think sometimes we need to make sure that we are celebrating. We talked about this a little bit last week, but celebrating what people are doing right and affirming people for doing a good job. And I know there are going to be people out there that can push back and go, I don't need to give somebody, a thank you for doing what they're supposed to be doing. To me, I would say, check yourself on that. And maybe you don't, I'm not, you get to decide what you do. But if your spirit is like, I'm not really looking to affirm everybody, we're just trying to get stuff done, I think you'll get a lot more done if you create a positive environment. I always say it's hard to go to a positive place with negative people. And if the leader's got a negative mindset, a heavy punitive mindset, sometimes that keeps us from our potential. And so I would say, let's create an environment where people are affirmed for what they're doing, for their ideas, for their innovation, sometimes for their mistakes. I like that you tried that. I know we didn't get the outcome we wanted, but I love the fact that you're still, you're willing to push the envelope here. Let's make sure next time we think about this. I mean, you can give coaching in the midst of affirmation, but I think people really do respond very well to a positive environment. And a lot of times that is the leader creates that environment. I'd say actually all the time, the leader's one that creates the temperature in the room. So that might be some low hanging fruit for somebody out there.
Yeah. And let me offer a cautionary note. Don't use the term recognition and affirmation interchangeably.
That's a good point.
Here's the deal. Recognition is easy. Affirmation is more challenging. Here's why. Recognition typically is one size fits all. Everybody who does X gets Y. Affirmation is when you do something that connects with and resonates with that individual. And yes, it's more challenging, and yes, it's more time consuming, but it's so much more powerful. Let me give you an example. You may say, I was at a company a few years back, and their top performer was given the opportunity, / expected to do a keynote in front of 7,000 people. I can promise you there are folks who did not want to become the top performer because they didn't want that recognition. Speaking in public is the number one fear of humans. It even outpaces the fear of death.
Yeah, I've heard people say they'd rather die than speak in public. I think that is actually in the real research.
Data to support that. So my point is, you could say, yeah, we recognize our top performers because they all do a keynote at this event. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but don't confuse that with affirmation, because some people are going to be affirmed if you give them a trophy. Some people are going to be affirmed if you give them a day off. Some people are going to be affirmed if you give them a check. Some people are going to be affirmed best if you write a personal note to an individual. I was shocked and continue to be shocked. I don't write near as many notes as I need to, and I should, particularly since it's become kind of a lost art. A text and a handwritten note are not the same. And I wrote a note to somebody one time, and it was really simple. And they thanked me later for it. This was 6 months later. They brought it up again. And I said, well, yeah, I was glad to, affirm what you had done. And this guy said, you don't know how important that is to me. And he made it present tense. And I said, well, I'm glad that it's meaningful. He said, no, you don't understand. I carry that note with me. I've got it right now. I carry it everywhere I go. See, that was a guy who was not going to be affirmed with a trophy or a plaque or a day off or a check for $1,000. He would have accepted those things. He was affirmed by that personal note. And so you don't know until you get to know people and you try to figure out what will be most affirming to them. One tactic you can try, did this several years back and should do it more often. I interviewed all the people on my team. And at this point, it was, multiple layers. I don't know, over 100 people, I guess. I spent a little time with every one of them. And I really just asked them one question. I said, tell me about the favorite recognition you've ever received in your career. Now, I use the term recognition because I didn't want them to try to parse out the language. What's the difference in recognition and affirmation? But I was able to discern based on what they told me, what they found most affirming. And you can ask your people, and most people will tell you about the best recognition they ever received. And you'll be shocked at how diverse the answers will be. All the things I mentioned and more. Well, you need to file that away, and you'll be ready the next time you have a chance to affirm that individual.
Yeah, I love that. I think about that sometimes with our, even in the business sense, but with our 4 kids. I've got one of my kids, like if you're going to affirm them, throw them a party. I got one that would just a heartfelt thank you and a quiet, walk together. Is they don't want a party. And so I think the same thing is true in your organization as it is with my kids. We've got to work to be, and I love the way you did that. We got to work to become fluent in the affirmation language of each of the people that we're trying to affirm, because they are different. And I think if we're not careful, like that organization you described with the keynote, people can disengage if we don't get this right and we don't speak their language. They're just like, I don't want that, and so I'm not doing that. And they'll almost pull back to avoid the recognition, and that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about really increasing that motivation, not decreasing it. Engagement does go up, though, we see when affirmation is present. Okay, so there was a third, what we I didn't say this at the beginning, but we call these the 4 cornerstones of engagement. There was a third cornerstone, Mark, of engagement. We have connection and affirmation. Share number 3 with them.
It's responsibility. And this, we can talk as little or as much as you'd like about this, but this might be the most obvious if you as the listener will internalize this and just think about a time in your life when you were given responsibility for something and ask how you felt. And my bet is that you leaned in, that you cared more. You were more engaged because you had a sense of responsibility. I need you to make a recommendation. I need you to make a decision. I need you to create a proposal. I need you to do X, Y, Z. Let me know how I can assist you, what resources you may need that you don't have at your disposal, but you're responsible. And even as you flash back on that moment, and you may have had a lot of those moments in your life and your career, you cared more because you were given real responsibility.
Yeah, I think there are people out there listening saying if you give them more responsibility, they're gonna lean in and be engaged and try. That data actually shows that. You're exactly right, Mark. When I accept responsibility, and they've got to accept it, but when you have that conversation, you give them something. Sometimes it's I don't want to do this. I hate it. It's not motivating me. And yet I've got somebody on my team here, and I'm afraid to ask them because if I do, they're gonna hate it. They're not gonna like it. The truth is, there's a lot of those things that we can get off of our plate that somebody else would say, I would love to do that. And I would lean into that and I will be motivated there. And I need a chance. And so I think this is probably some low hanging fruit for some people. Here's what the research does show. When people are given responsibility and they accept that responsibility, their engagement actually, it doesn't just go up, it goes through the roof. This is the one where it really moves people to action when they really are given responsibility. And not only that, it actually ties in a little bit to what we talked about last week with them growing. It's amazing how when I've grown in the past, it's because somebody's given me an opportunity to do something. And you've said this before, the best way to learn how to lead is to lead something. And so this, again, responsibility, this is a great one here. We get a chance to really increase the engagement when we start sharing responsibility with others.
Yep. All right, so let's talk about the fourth
last one. Put a bow on it for us.
Well, it's the environment, and there are a lot of things that fit here, but I don't want to trivialize it because there are a lot of elements. But you want to think about safety, physical safety, psychological safety. By the way, psychological safety, we refer to that as community earlier. When Google did a study of their best teams, they realized that psychological safety was the difference maker, or in our language, community. But that's part of the environment that you've got to create. And you can do things to help people feel safe enough to bring their whole self to work, bring their ideas, bring their challenges, bring their skepticism, bring their genius to the work at hand. There are resources. If you want to increase somebody's engagement, be sure they've got resources. If you ask somebody to do something that they physically don't have the resources to do, sort of an unfunded mandate, you're not going to raise engagement. You're going to depress engagement. What about skills, knowledge and skills? If somebody asks you to do something and you physically do not know how, or you do not have the skills. Now, this is not to say there's no place for initiative, but if there's a prerequisite set of skills that you do not possess, then that's not going to be enhance your engagement. It's going to depress your engagement. So these things and others are typically things that leadership provides, that you don't expect a team to find their own resources or to train themselves necessarily. And so when we think about environment, leaders have to assume responsibility for that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, so we've got. I noticed what we have here. We have basically the care. We've got connection, affirmation, responsibility, and the environment. And if anybody's listening out there and you're looking for a plan to help you increase the engagement in your organization, I think this is a good place to start. I will mention Mark's book again, Win the Heart. If you're looking for a copy of that, Mark, you and I also wrote a field guide and a quick start guide around that content. They can get all that stuff at leadeveryday.com. That would be helpful to you. I encourage you to pick up those resources. You really can go to work and build a culture of engagement. And I can't think of anything, especially if your engagement is, whether it's 30% or not, even if it's at 60%, why would you want to leave that 40% on the table? Let's go after these high performance organizations that you have got these wholehearted people locked in on what it is they're supposed to be locked in on. And it to me, Mark, when I'm going through the motions, it is demotivating. It is a struggle to, I don't typically just go through the motions, but if there's ever been a time in my life where I'd feel like I'm just kind of, I don't even know how to describe it. It just makes me uncomfortable to think about it. It's
disengaged.
Disengaged. It's so disheartening to think about it. But when you wake up every day and you're passionate about what you're doing, you're passionate about the people that you're doing it with, you feel like there's affirmation, that environment is right, and you really feel responsible for meaningful work. There's just nothing better than getting up every day and making a difference in the world. And so that really would be our hope for everybody listening, that would be the case. All right, we'll be back with you next week. Great discussion today. I hope you'll share with your friends and family. Keep coming back for the Lead Every Day show. Remember, the best leaders really do lead every day.